It's exactly what happened here in the Lake and Riley murder.
I'm sorry that Representative Collins has left. I was just presented with a tweet that he sent out about the New Jersey-born Episcopalian Bishop Marianne Budd, who performed a service as part of the inaugural ceremonies, and apparently he was not pleased with what she had to say, and he wrote, "The person giving this sermon should be added to the deportation list." And I would have asked him whether he was serious about that. Of course, the Episcopalian bishop is a U.S. citizen, but of course, that's very much in the spirit of the time.
Collins suggested adding Bishop Marianne Budd, a U.S. citizen and leader of the Episcopal Church, to a deportation list. Why? Because she dared to speak out against the cruelty of Trump-era immigration policies and advocate for marginalized groups. The absurdity of targeting a religious leader for exercising her moral responsibility was about as low as they could go. This wasn't just ignorance. It was authoritarianism masquerading as patriotism.
It reminds me of the period of the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798, when there was an effort to use the Alien and Sedition Acts, which have been invoked recently by the new president, in order to persecute the political opponents of the administration, as well as to chase down and kick out of the country all of the dangerous French immigrants who were spreading revolutionary propaganda in the country. And a friend of Jefferson's wrote to him, John Taylor, to say how exhausted he was by all of the political fighting and the demonizing of immigrants and the attempt to shut the borders down and to attack political opponents as enemies of the state and so on. And Jefferson wrote him this beautiful letter back. You should check it out online if you can. It's a letter to John Taylor. And in it, he counseled patience. He said, "A little patience, and the reign of witches shall pass over, their spells dissolve, and the people, recovering their true sight, recover the true principles of their government." In the meantime, he said, we're suffering all of the horrors and indignities of the hysteria. But he said, if the game runs against us at home sometimes, as inevitably it will, then, he said, we must have patience, because this is a game where principles are at stake.
The GOP representative presenting the so-called Lake and Riley bill stood before Congress, painting a dark picture of undocumented immigrants as emboldened criminals, destined to commit heinous acts. He could have been talking about his own party for that matter, but this kind of rhetoric is predictable, and worse, it's effective for their base. They don't present facts, they present fear. They don't offer solutions, they create scapegoats. And they hope that the American people won't look too closely at the cracks in their story. Jamie Raskin, as always, wasn't about to let that happen. From the moment he took to the floor, his mission was clear: to dismantle the GOP's argument, expose their hypocrisy, and remind us all of what truly is at stake.
We don't claim somehow that one side or the other is morally righteous and the other is morally wrong. We're trying to have a public policy debate. And the role of public emotion in public policy debates, Mr. Speaker, is an interesting thing. Some people think it's enough to show up and say there's been a terrible event, there's been a sickening murder or rape, therefore you must pass our bill, without even reading the bill, without even looking to see what's in the bill. Does it make sense as a matter of public policy? If that were the standard they actually believed in, they would be voting for all of the gun safety legislation they've been rejecting, because every time there's a massacre, whether it's in Connecticut or Florida or Texas or Illinois or any of our communities, we come in and we say, we want what the American people want in public opinion polls, a universal violent criminal background check. We want a ban on military-style assault weapons. There's no reason 18-year-olds should be bearing AR-15s and showing up in classrooms and churches and synagogues with weapons of mass destruction. If it were enough just to appeal to emotion, they would be voting with us. But no, they say, well, that conflicts with their public policy understanding. Well, at the very least, you think they would have the burden of telling us what they do support. But we never hear anything. You don't hear a peep out of them about gun violence, because the Second Amendment, as they misinterpret it, is sacrosanct. as well as their NRA support and contributions.
The Republican narrative wasn't about justice for Riley or creating meaningful reform. It was about exploiting her death to push policies that erode principles that we hold dear as a nation. The GOP's rhetoric framed undocumented immigrants as inherently dangerous, a threat to American families. They leaned heavily on fear, describing immigrants as criminals whose actions would inevitably escalate into more heinous crimes. But Raskin didn't just push back, he brought receipts. He pointed out that studies consistently show undocumented immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than native-born citizens. That wasn't conjecture, it was a fact. But fact has never been the GOP's strong point. Their argument isn't about what's real. It's about what actually scares people the most. Raskin's critique didn't stop at the immigration rhetoric. He broadened the discussion to highlight the selective outrage that defines the Republican Party. While they claim to care about public safety, they actively block measures that would save lives. Measures like universal background checks or bans on assault weapons, supported by vastly the majority of Americans. Raskins pointed out to a chilling reality: the United States has a gun homicide rate 25 times higher than that of other developed nations. And yet, the same Republicans who rail against immigrants refuse to act on gun reform. Their silence on these issues speaks volumes. The Laken Riley bill is the foundation of the GOP's agenda. It isn't just about addressing specific cases of violence by allowing immigrants to be detained and deported based on accusations alone. Even if charges are dropped, it undermines the very foundation of due process. Raskin warned that this isn't just about immigration. It's about eroding rights for one group as a precursor to eroding rights for all. This is how authoritarianism takes root, by normalizing the removal of civil liberties a little bit at a time under the guise of safety. But let's shift to Trump's reaction to Bishop Boud's sermon. Have you ever witnessed something so arrogant and entitled? You could see it on his face: disdain, irritation, and a total lack of self-awareness. This was a man who looked like he'd rather burst into flames than hear the truth spoken from a pulpit. Boud's words weren't inflammatory. They were a plea. She called for mercy and compassion, for the country's leadership to recognize the fear and pain felt by the most vulnerable among us: LGBTQ plus children, immigrants, and anyone marginalized by divisive rhetoric. Trump's response, or lack thereof, was telling. This is a man surrounded by an inner circle of bad aroma and self-interest. The faces in the audience, his, J.D. Vance's, and Trump's family, were not those of leaders humbled by faith. They were the faces of people who believe that they're above accountability, above truth, and above any moral compass that challenges their pursuit of power. But Boud didn't back down. Her sermon wasn't designed to please or flatter. It was meant to hold power accountable. She showed the true essence of leadership, a backbone, and the courage to stand for compassion and justice, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it puts you in the crosshairs of those who wield enormous influence. This brings us to a critical point.